Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video, and I was absolutely proven wrong about the Augmentation Evoker. I had this specialization ranked at the very bottom of the list of all available specializations in PvP, and that is absolutely not the case. It does a remarkable amount of damage and provides still excellent support in PvP situations with a unique gameplay experience with the utilization of Ebon Might, which is a buff that you will cast and then extend through your other abilities, amplifying your damage. The real satisfying part about the class is when you're able to get the successful deep breath, tip the scales upheaval combo on multiple targets. If you can actually achieve this, you will completely eradicate any of your opponents with massive burst damage. And I think the main contributing reasons to why this specialization is so potent at the moment is that it is excellent at countering melee DPS with things like blistering scales, hover with snare suppression, rescue to pull allies and maneuver yourself around the map with a plethora of knockbacks, and the ability to use obsidian scales to make yourself immune to interrupts. Because of all of these things, melee DPS have a really hard time sticking to you, and you can kind of run circles around them. Also note that Sleepwalk has been improved in this season as well. It no longer has a cooldown. So you can spam Sleepwalk the same way that you would a polymorph, except it's not going to heal the target to full, and it really disrupts a lot of enemies, and it will often bait enemies to interrupt you so that you can then cast more valuable spells like Ebon Might or Eruption. So these changes all coupled together have really made Augmentation a lot more of a viable specialization in competitive play. You can see in this scenario, all of my crowd control is disrupted, but it meant that our paladin was able to cast crowd control freely and secure enough damage in order to get a kill. So I was actually very surprised. I thought the damage for Augmentation was going to fall off, but I'm still playing the build from last patch and still having a lot of good success with it. Main combo is to just get Ebon Might up right away, get Fire Breath on multiple targets, then Deep Breath through those targets, turn around, tip the scales upheaval, and watch the fireworks. That's basically the one-shot combo that we're trying to look for and enemies are trying to avoid, and it almost always delivers. And even if you don't get that one-shot, your sustained damage is actually still surprisingly very high, even despite that. As long as you're using prescience to keep buffing your allies in between your Ebon Might windows, you'll notice that you provide a lot of support and just a lot of damage yourself as well. So we're going to get Ebon Might here at the start of round 2, try and extend it with eruptions, trinket this crowd control initially so we don't lose our Ebon Might, find a Sleepwalk out of the Hammer of Justice. Fire Breath, this is where I'm looking to try and combo Fire Breath into a Deep Breath into an upheaval, and I'm looking to try and hit as many targets as possible. And you can see it cracks a ton of damage. The Windwalker traded just in the nick of time there with Touch of Karma, and we can just use obsidian scales pretty freely here at the start to make sure that we're not getting interrupted, get our presciences going, keep extending our Ebon Might as long as possible here. And we're actually top of the damage meter at the moment, above an Ellie Shaman here in this position, or a Windwalker or a Warrior. We know how broken a lot of these specializations, maybe not Elemental Shaman so much, can actually be. And look, we can just maneuver around these melee, get to the other side. If we get kicked on Sleepwalk, we don't really care. We can just use Fire Breath and then just immediately go back to it. And the nice part too is if they fade our Sleepwalk, it doesn't go on cooldown now, so we can just keep spamming it. Sleepwalk, Sleepwalk, Sleepwalk. And being able to have that spam crowd control makes you as viable as a Warlock in a lot of situations where you can now actually effectively appeal enemy attackers. So it's remarkably good in that regard. And here we're just building up charges of essence for our next Ebon Might window, as we're looking to try and extend that for as long as possible. With this damage, it's more sustain oriented with an Elemental Shaman. So we're going to spam out eruptions after our Ebon Might, try and get some Sleepwalks onto the healer pretty soon. And we don't care if he fades. So we're just going to cast Sleep, let it go through. Keep hovering around him, keep going for sleeps, keep trying to get pressure. I will say, though, Elemental Shaman as a specialization is definitely fallen from its graces in the high heavens that it was last patch with the changes to Primordial Wave. You can see this Elemental Shaman is really struggling in order to get any sort of semblance of pressure out against the opposing team. Us, on the other hand, hey, we're top of the damage meter. We're kind of chilling here in round number 2, but Ellie Shaman seems to be struggling a lot. I would definitely say Ellie might be either the weakest or close, definitely the weakest on Tuesday with the buffs that are coming through for Demonology and Destro and the stamina changes. I think Elemental Shaman is going to have a really hard time, but Augmentation Evoker, I don't know. It was actually kind of just nice to play something that's completely different than a lot of the other specializations in the game at the moment. So now we get the warrior on our team. Like same game plan. Ebon Might, extend it with eruption. Look to get fire breath on as many targets. Deep breath through those targets, and then tip the scales upheaval. And if we can get that combo, we're going to be able to absolutely destroy people. All of the talents linked in the description down below. I see a triple fear. I really want to move in on that. Get Ebon Might up. Get into a position where I can get fire breath. I see a spear pinning them. Perfect positioning. Deep breath. Double hit. Huge damage comes through. Should have tipped the scales here. I don't know why I didn't, but I think maybe because I saw wall and I wanted to hold it, but you should just always send it. We got wall karma. They're very quick to react. If they did not react like that, they would have almost immediately exploded. Here we can use rescue, pull the paladin away from the cleave, get him on top of the healer for a hammer of justice, go for a sleep, and you can see that we can make plays on this specialization now with CC chains, with setup, with burst, with sustain, with these kind of cool utility moments in between our goes with prescience, and it actually has a very interesting play style. I think it's actually much improved from previous patches in that regard. Obviously, this one shot, if it wasn't as hard, it would likely not be as viable. We're just in a burst meta at the moment. Hopefully they're going to be able to tune that down, shave that off, and bring us back to more of a kind of more sustained damaged meta. Because I think for the healers, watching HP bars just get absolutely zapped down to 0 and then have to heal them back up and then almost immediately zap down to 0 is quite an emotional roller coaster. So bringing that down so it's more like, hey, you spend a little bit of time at 80%, maybe down to 60%. It's kind of slowly going down and up, I think would be a lot healthier. Maybe Aug will struggle if that ends up being the case later on. But for the first week of the PvP season, definitely don't sleep on the Aug. Here we're going to hover in again. We got Ebon Might up. We're going to eruption a couple of times to extend it, and we're going to try and stack enemies up. So I'm trying to move towards the shaman to bring the warrior who's likely to attack me on top of the shaman so that I can try and get fire breath to hit multiple targets. Unfortunately, the warrior's not exactly falling for my trap, because if you don't hit multiple targets with the fire breath and the deep breath, it doesn't do as much damage. So I get a little bit of an angle. I go for it, but he dodges it. It still ends up connecting at least a decent amount of damage here onto the shaman, forcing trinket wall and trinket from paladin immediately, rally and bop every single cooldown. So main goal is to try and drag enemies into a position where you can stack them in order to get that combo. Once you've gotten that combo, there's no need anymore to really stand on top of the shaman. I'll just take too much damage. So I kind of pull away, bring the warrior behind the pillar, start going after him by myself, and I can use blistering scales as well to deter him. I use prescience in between my Ebon Might windows in order to just amplify the damage of my teammates, because my damage is going to fall off while we're waiting for Ebon Might's cooldown. Position on top of the paladin. This is where baiting a kick with sleepwalk would be better, because if you get kicked on sleep, you can still cast other spells, but if you get kicked on eruption, you're kicked on pretty much everything. So you have to be really careful deciding what spells you're going to cast and when. We get Ebon Might up here, but we get stunned. I want to get the fire breath. I want to spam eruptions here. It's really important, but I'm getting spam CC'd, which is a good way for opponents to actually completely negate your pressures. Anytime they cast Ebon Might, just CC them. But as soon as I'm free, snap, crackle, pop, we are sending the shaman down to the shop, and we are able to clean up here for round number 4 and move into round number 5. So I really like its utility. I like its team play. I think the sleepwalk cooldown change made Evoker a lot more of a competitive option than before. And so kind of just this cheese like cooldown. I can get one sleep. Now you're actually a spammable DR of crowd control, kind of like a cyclone that's dispellable, but with the damage thresholds as well, you can do some damage into a sleepwalk and it doesn't break. So it's very powerful now, I would say, and it's likely going to leak over into Devastation's power as well. Some difficulties I've noticed though can be rogues. Rogues can be very tough to deal with, and I do expect that rogue is likely going to be at least decently popular, given that I think all 3 specializations are viable at the moment. Ebon Might start the game off, couple eruptions, look to try and stack them up by running on top of the shaman, and we see a spear here on the shaman, so I'm angling here, getting ready for my deep fire breath into deep breath into my palm upheaval, dodge the searing glare, pop them off, tip the scales, upheaval, cleave a couple of the pets, try and take them out. But this team's gotten wise to the strat. They've got wise to the one shot, but forcing the cooldowns nonetheless is definitely going to be putting your team more and more in a better position. So we're going to spam sleepwalks now. We get that caught onto the paladin, rescue in the warrior onto the shaman. I really like that utility. You can just pull melee towards their target, help them get uptime, and really assist them. I feel like Aug actually, at the moment at least, has ended up in a spot where it's actually a kind of a cool support role, the way that I think they intended it for PvE, that everybody has just been hating on it for. So a little bit strange that, the spec that was designed, I think mostly with raids and PvE in mind, has ended up being, the most viable or interesting now in PvP, because it's not this completely ungodly, unkillable spec like it used to be when it was really frustrating in PvP, but it still has a lot of the unique utility flavor. So if you're looking for more of that kind of support style, we'll definitely provide that. We go back to Sleepwalks, we get kicked, we don't care, we just spam Eruption, and we can get our Ebonmite up now. Oh, we get kicked on, too bad. We can use Prescience and try and hover away, get a little bit of distance here, go for the Ebonmite again, Fire Breath combo. We get a double fear, spamming up massive eruptions. And I've basically noticed that the most viable specs are the ones that can crit for like at least 1.6 million at some point in the game. And obviously the frequency to which you can crit for 1.6 million is going to increase your likelihood of viability and how powerful you're going to be. And Augmentation can easily get that level of crits. So I definitely think it's a competitive option. Current meta, we force Karma off around the corner as we hover back into the fight to try and get stuff going here onto the Shaman. I see an opportunity to get a triple deep breath, so I'm not going to worry about the perfect combo. I want to get a triple stun, and with that triple stun we can absolutely knock them all down. All the King's men and all the King's horses. Ain't going to be putting Humpty Dumpty, the elemental shaman, back together again here. And in the final round, we're going to try and grab him a win. You can see it, like, look at my overall damage on details. Like, I'm keeping up with the Arms Warrior at 53 million overall damage. I think I've slept on it for a really long time. It's always had this kind of cheesy one-shot, but it feels more than just the cheesy one-shot now in this current pacing of the game. It feels a lot better, a lot more consistent, and a lot more solid as a spec. So definitely give it its respects. And if you want to try something different, then I think that it's going to be a really good time. So we're going to start the game off. Ebonmite, couple eruptions, same game plan as always. It also gives us a couple of instant living flames that we can lob out. I'm going to use the Oppressing Roar, Fire Breath, Trinket the Stun, Deep Breath. He ended up heroic leaping away, which is really sad because I was going to do a lot of damage right there if that warrior didn't heroic leap from that. We forced Divine Shield though. We got Sack, we got Warrior's Trinket. So if that warrior didn't leap, I actually kind of wonder if we would have just won in the opener. Unfortunately, my Shaman just almost immediately then gets crushed after that. We're going to rescue him, try and pull him away from the DPS, root them with a landslide. Lots of little clutch positioning things that you can do with the specialization. Try and give your team an edge. Our priest gets caught in a repentance and uses Trinket though, and we're kind of in a tough spot here. The Shaman is really looking fragile as our priest is getting crowd controlled a lot. We're trying to get on top of the Paladin. I should have kicked that repentance. I thought he'd fake it, so I was just going for sleep, but he just kind of went for it. And I think here, the Shaman is probably just not going to recover. We're going to toss a Blistering Scales, try and give him a little bit of an Absorb Shield, get a bit of distance, distract the Warrior with ourselves. And we're going to use some cooldowns pretty soon here. We're doing Blaze and an Obsidian Scales. But with that, we should be able to survive. And now we can just spam Sleep. And look at this. Hex on the Paladin, Sleep on the Warrior. And I can really just spam this if I want. So I can take the Warrior out of the game for some time here. Rebuff Prescience during the Searing Glare. Off heal during the Searing Glare also is a really good usage of your utility. Whenever you see that spell, you can't land damage spells. So it's better to just use healing and defense and utility. And then we just end up kind of getting smacked around there towards the final second. But for giving Aug, its first go of it in this patch, and I was going into it thinking it was going to be completely unviable, it was actually very good. And it actually felt like a solid spec. It's got this cheese mechanic, but it doesn't feel like it's only a cheese mechanic anymore. So definitely keep your eyes on the specialization. Important to review the strategies that we talked about in this video if you're going to be combating against it or utilizing it yourself. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated.